I'd like to introduce my boss and the executive director of ARCI. That's Ken Meyer, who this work was definitely inspired by. We are a good team at ARCI. And I want to just share some of our research findings with the use of tracking technology on these three amazing Florida birds. ARCI is based out of Gainesville, Florida, but we do research all over the state and into the southeast. And because our birds are migratory, we often are doing research throughout the Caribbean and into South America with these birds too. I wanted to start with a little show and tell, so I hope you can see this. This is a Gsm GPS transmitter that we are affixing to all these birds. I'll take the orange tape has nothing to do with it, but the strapping is what's going over the bird. If you picture the bird going through here, and each wing is coming out and the tail comes out the back. So this is individually fit to each bird's body. Same transmitter here is being put on snail kites, swallowtail kites, and short-tail hawks, and white ibis and great egrets. So it's a very powerful tool that we are able to get remotely tracked GPS locations up to like 8 to 15 a day per 24 hours. So some at night, some during the day. And with that information, we're just learning so much about these birds when they're not in our sites and all over the world. So this is the key to a lot of our research. And of course, I wanted to thank our sponsors. We have funding sources through grants and foundations and small monetary amounts, or big and large, all different sizes from various groups. A lot of bird groups, Audubon societies, and zoos and gardens throughout the state, and then definitely through state and federal agencies as well. All of the species I am talking about today are affected by development change. If you've not seen this before, just pay attention to the color of the red lines. The red sections are developed land. So as you can imagine, as you've probably seen in your backyards and neighborhoods, that we are losing natural land. It is becoming developed very fast, and all of these species are affected. Not just these, but many different many of our birds and other wildlife. So these are things we need to keep in the back of our mind as we approach conservation in Florida and throughout these birds ranges. I want to start with short-tailed hawks. If you are not familiar with this bird, it is a bird-eating raptor. So they come in a dark morph and a light morph. There is no intermediate. They're either dark or light, like you see here, and they'll breed with each other. Males or females can be either of these colors. They are threatened, or they're species of interest because they have such a small population size here in Florida, and really they're just limited to the state of Florida throughout their US range. So they are also found in Central and South America, but here in the United States, there's just a very small population. And they do, as we've found out, they do have a migration, but I'll show you more about that in a minute. And then even though their population size is so small, they do not have a state or federal listing status. So there's no extra protection of these birds with any regulatory means. So here's just a little clip of their distribution. They do extend through into South America, but you can see that the green area is only in the state of Florida. Some of those Mexican short-tailed hawks do get into Texas and Arizona. And actually there's been a couple reports of nesting birds in Arizona in the past. But as far as the stronghold and really the population is found right here in Florida, mostly in the peninsula of Florida. So we have been researching short-tailed hawks since 1998. Projects simply on nest success and productivity. How are they moving throughout Florida? Trying to get a hold of or a handle on the population size. And then all of this information is gathered to make management and conservation recommendations. So in the past, we've done these nest searching and productivity research, and more recently, we've been doing population monitoring, and this is with citizen scientists. So I'll have more on that in a minute. So the short-tailed hawks migrate to South Florida and parts of the Keys after they are done with the breeding season. So pretty much the areas south of Lake Okeechobee. Now there are short-tailed hawks that do stay on territory, and we've seen them do this just south of Clearwater in St. Petersburg. We know that birds stay on territory in these city environments. So when these birds have been clustered in South Florida, we had trapped a few of these birds while they're on their wintering ranges to put transmitters on them to see then where they go during the breeding season. So there's more birds clustered in South Florida, and we find these areas that they're common, and we are able to capture them, and then we release them and go look for them in the breeding season. Here's an example of one of the birds we tagged with a remote transmitter. This was a satellite tagged bird, and we tagged it in the Everglades, and it spent the summer in Seminole County, moved around quite a bit. This was an adult male. And then in the following winter, it came, let's see if you can see my cursor here. It came straight back to the Everglades. And then it went up here to just north of Big Cypress National Preserve, and spent another segment of its wintering destination. So at first it bounced or flew all the way down here, maybe following migratory birds and feeding on them as they cluster in parts of South Florida. And then as saturation happens, as more and more short-tailed hawks move south, they start spreading out for the rest of their wintering season. So this bird went up to this area in Hendry County before then returning to its breeding area. Here's another GSM GPS tagged bird. This was dark arrow tagged at Sawgrass Lake Sawgrass Lake Park in Pinellas County. So just down the road from you, an adult male that stayed on territory its full tracking life. So in the center of all these colors, so this, you're going to see a few maps like this with different colored lines. So basically the lines are connecting GPS locations that were produced by that transmitter that were then uploaded to the cellular data network. And then we are able to process the data, and then this just connects those lines. So of course, it wasn't a straight line between each of these points, but you know, they could meander a little bit between. But what I wanted to emphasize here is that this bird stayed on territory the whole time, and very similar activity during its breeding seasons. In 2017 is the blue lines, and then under there 2018 are the orange lines. And you can see that bird routinely goes to the mangrove edges. A lot of birds, a lot of songbirds gather in these areas, so it's probably finding great food and then coming back to roost, and of course to its nest to feed its young and its mate after foraging about. Other birds that we've tagged with VHF, the conventional transmitters where you have to actually use a receiver to listen for a frequency that's an individual frequency on each of the transmitters we put on the birds. And we would fly in an airplane after, so still tagged in South Florida, and then following them to their nesting areas in the peninsula. So the ideal situation would be to track an adult female and find it very steady signal in one place, which would mean that she's most likely incubating on a nest. And that was our goal. That's exactly what we wanted to find. But look out here. This is the Weeki Wachee, or no, it's Chassahowitzka. So it's just north or south of Weeki Wachee and just north of Clearwater. So on the Gulf Coast in this beautiful hammock, wet forest. And we located as best we could with a GPS from an airplane where the signal was. And then we walked in about 3 miles, it seemed like, to reach this location to see if that was true, if we could find a nest. And we did. We found amongst this big forest, we came across the nest of this bird by following the signal right to the beeping VHF transmitter. So it was interesting to know how far away from civilization this was, and that, you know, by chance, nobody would really know those birds were nesting out there in these big swaths of contiguous forest. So we do see birds in urban situations now, but there may be a preference to these big swaths of public land, or you know, that are left and available for them. So again, a point to leaving large tracts of land untouched for these birds. And now what we're doing to track the numbers of short-tailed hawks is these raptor road surveys when the birds are gathering in South Florida. So in 2005 and 6, with funding from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, we did 3 different protocols to see if we could survey what way was the most efficient to survey short-tailed hawks in the and cost the least amount of money. So we did a road survey, which you see the lines here of our routes that we traveled, you know, accessible places to the public. And then we also did a boat survey through areas within the Everglades. So we went around Cape Sable and some of these great waterways, where the birds were concentrated as well. And we did a helicopter survey trying to identify birds from the air, which we did. We definitely found short-tailed hawks, but obviously that would be the most costly measure. So over the boat surveys, these road surveys were most cost effective, and we actually found the most birds doing these surveys. So it entails just finding a couple of volunteers that can identify short-tailed hawks and going to locations along that route where we have designated stopping sites where we get out and watch the sky for 7 minutes, and then count and try to observe what color morph and if we can age the birds as well, and collect that data and try to do that 3 times through the season. So that's late October through December. And what we're doing is just getting an index of the numbers of birds using these areas and passing through. And by doing it a few times over the season, we can see when the peak of those migratory birds are going through the keys. And we time it with the Hawk Watch station that's occurring in Curry Hammock by Marathon in the lower keys. And over time, we hope to just have like an index of the birds that are using these areas. So we can see if we can measure productivity a little bit, because if we do have a good way to identify the adults from the young birds, we can have a ratio of, you know, adults to young to kind of get a sense of how the breeding season went the prior year. And so this is something that if you are interested in helping out, you should get a hold of us, and we might get you on a team to look for short-tailed hawks in the fall. During the breeding season, short-tailed hawks and swallowtail kites are often in the same areas. They do have a lot of the same nest requirements, so we find them breeding close to each other. One place in along the Peace River, we had a colony of, or a group of swallowtail kites breeding, and we also found a short-tailed hawk nest there in a cypress strand along the Peace River. And the second year we knew about this place, the short-tailed hawks actually used one of the swallowtail kite nests from the former year, and they started a little bit earlier, and they're a little more aggressive, so they held on to that nest territory. And so the swallowtail kites, they just moved over a few trees or whatever, and found a new place to nest. But that's not a uncommon situation to have these two birds in the same area. So let's move on to swallowtail kites, which I don't know if you've been seeing any yet in your area. I was fortunate enough to see one in Osceola County as I was driving to do field work last week. So these are the early birds still. Some of the birds in South Florida are actually getting back fast and starting to claim nest territories and starting to build. And but a lot of our birds, as I'll show you in a bit, that we are tracking are still in South America. So there's still a great push of them in the next couple weeks. We'll get most of them back. So why do we study swallowtail kites still? You know, they're actually doing quite well. Their populations, as we are keeping up with them, and I'll show you our best population monitoring scheme for these birds, but we're seeing that they're stable and maybe slightly increasing. But They are not recolonizing their former range. As you see on the map on the left, pre-1940s, swallowtail kites nested in portions of 21 states, all the way up into Minnesota, along the Mississippi River. So they really were in these big flood plain forests. And then there was a lot of logging and even some persecution and egg collecting. And the range of swallowtail kites contracted to nesting in only parts of 7 states. And actually now they are, along the Gulf Coast states and then up the Atlantic seaboard, mostly in South Carolina as their northern range, but just recently in the last few years, some birds are budding into nesting in North Carolina as well. So swallowtail kites are social and they will nest close to where other birds are nesting, other kites, and bud off of used known nesting areas. So for a group to like disband and go to a whole new place far away from other kites is quite unusual. But maybe there's some hope that there'll be more nesting up into North Carolina. So when swallowtail kites get back in the spring, right now they are claiming nest territories. They like to use an open crotch in the top of a tree. In Florida, many birds are nesting in pine trees and cypress, but they'll use maple, oak, any big tree that has an open canopy, an open spot for those birds to get in and out of. And if you notice the nest here, it's got a lot of Spanish moss and a lot of old man's beard lichen. They have little feet, so they can't carry big sticks like a osprey or a red shoulder hawk you would see in their nests. So they use the Spanish moss to kind of be the glue, the matrix to hold all that nest material together. A big shout out here to all the photographers who have donated photos to us. Max Stone is a fabulous conservation photographer from Florida, and he does wonderful work on many different projects all over the world. So we are grateful to his sharing and working with us on a few projects. We have recently worked with, partnered with American Bird Conservancy and Sustainable Forestry Initiative and many different timber companies, large and small, to emphasize that there is conservation happening on these working forest lands. So for swallowtail kites, which we've been doing for many, many years on commercially owned timberlands, we have found that there are many swallowtail kites that are nesting on these private lands. So if you look at this picture, so sure, there's a big clear cut here and various ages of different trees within here. So these are probably young planted pines, but if you come into this hardwood strand, which is a lighter colored green, you'll see these pop up big tree islands out here. Just ideal places for swallowtail kites to find a nest tree. So by working with these timber companies, we can identify these areas that swallowtail kites are using presently and protect those areas, see if they can leave them out of a harvest plan, or maybe buffer them, or in the future plan on leaving sections. It doesn't have to be many trees, but what they really benefit from this like diverse structure of the forest. So if you look across here, there's a lot of edge, there's a lot of there's a in this case, there's a meandering stream over on the left side here, where this is in Levy County, the Gulf Hammock area. But the birds are able to find a lot of food along the edges, and then have these like a perpetual timber forest to nest in, as long as the timber companies are leaving large enough trees for the kites to nest. And it might not be that the same stand every year, but as long, because they do have to harvest at least some sections of trees, but then they're replanted. It'll take a while, but as long as there are still large trees on the landscape, it can be a good situation for kites and many other birds that are found in these areas. We'd love you to look at this a little bit closer. We have this dual publication. It's online. If you go to Audubon magazine and you Google a precarious perch, Audubon magazine, it is, what is it? Its name is escaping me right now. I think it's anyways, Swallowtail Kites in the Audubon magazine. And then the same article is run in the Biographic online magazine, and that's a precarious perch. And you can find different photos and videos from Max Stone in both. So I suggest looking at both of them and learning a little bit more about these nesting kites on timberlands. And we have found a lot out about swallowtail kites by remote tracking. Here's Ken Meyer with a recently tagged bird. This one has a satellite transmitter on it, so you can see this big antenna, and that's a little bit different than the one I had shown you before, which is a GSM transmitter that uses cell phone towers to transmit the data. But they both are solar powered. So that's this little panel here. It gathers energy from the light, and it allows them to last a long time and have a very light battery inside to give us data over time. We have been able to find these amazing pre-migratory roost sites with our satellite and GSM data. So these places are gathering spots where the birds roost and sleep and rest and get ready for migration. So they are using each other for protection, finding predators, finding safe places to land and sleep. And then during the day, they go find insects. So swallowtail kites, adults especially, their main diet is insects. And they've got to fatten up. They've got to eat a lot of insects before they migrate. So they use each other to find these ephemeral foraging areas, and they return to these pre-migration sites year after year, and we're finding more and more of these locations because we have birds with remote tracking devices on them. So this is a way that we are able to really get an assessment of the population over time, because not just birds from Florida are using these roosts, but we've got birds all the way around the Gulf and up the Atlantic shore, those populations are coming through Florida as they head south for their winter destinations. Some birds come to these roost sites for a month or even 6 weeks. They will finish nesting and go straight to a roost area, using the same area for up to 6 weeks, and where they just, that is a known spot for them. They know they can find other birds there, and then they can all find the appropriate food to get fat and ready to migrate. And some birds just go through a roost site in one day. And this is all things we've seen with our tracked birds. Other birds will jump around from roost to roost, some of these known places, and spend a week here, 5 days here, 1 day here, one day here, as they kind of bounce through the state, like pinball through these roost sites as they exit and get ready to cross the Gulf of Mexico. So this is really, really a gift that swallowtail kites have given us to be able to use to assess the population. We can fly, we can get up early. The swallowtail kites sleep in. They wait for those roost sites to, they wait for the thermals to rise, make it easier to fly before they get up. And so the first 2 hours of light, we have a little window of time to fly over very, very carefully without disturbing the birds. And we take pictures of all the birds in the trees, and then later go on the ground back at the computer, we count all those little white heads. So you can probably see this smattering of white underneath the airplane here. And we would take those pictures to then keep track of those numbers over time and add them together across the roost sites. Do that a few times over the season when they're roosting, which is mostly the month of July and into August a little bit. And then we can find where the peak of roosting and the numbers of birds, and then we have a maximum count that we can use over time to watch those trend lines in the population. And this is how we've seen that the birds are doing okay, stabilizing, if not increasing in numbers. And in addition to this, we've been using citizen science observations as well. So we have a website that we request sightings from anyone out there who might see swallowtail kites during this roosting time of year, because not every single swallowtail kite is using one of these roosts. There are some small, maybe neighborhood roosts and foraging areas that we don't know about. And all of those numbers that we get from citizen scientists are counted within our final totals. So it's a great way to get involved again. This is what the swallowtail kites are getting ready for. They're making this giant migration, starting off crossing 200 miles at least over the ocean once they leave the peninsula of Florida. Some birds go to Cuba, and many go straight to the Yucatan. That's the goal, is to get to the Yucatan of Mexico. But as you can see in this diagram, this is often the start of hurricane season, which can be good and bad, because as you may know, hurricanes are moving counterclockwise, and that wind could assist them leaving the peninsula to get to the Yucatan quite quickly if they time it well. But if they are caught in the wrong winds, they could be blown out into the middle of Gulf of Mexico. And as we learned last year, a bird has a lifespan over water at a maximum of 4 days. And that is pushing it. That is a lot of energy they use to get across the Gulf. Here are 6 or 7 lines of different colors from different remotely tracked swallowtail kites that left the US. We have a colleague in Louisiana that tagged 2 birds there, and you can see one cut all the way across the Gulf of Mexico and the other one went completely around the Gulf of Mexico. But the goal is to get to South America, parts of Brazil, southwestern Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay. And that's the final destination. And they take their time heading south. Once they are northbound, they leave like the last 2 weeks of January. They start north and they come back much quicker and make even a more risky jump across the Gulf of Mexico to get back to their breeding areas, which is happening right now. So it's always a pins and needle time of year for me, because I know how many birds are coming across. I can just imagine how many birds are flying across the Gulf of Mexico, and these cold fronts push against them, and we often have birds that just don't make it over the water. So give those birds your good thoughts. And speaking of, we have we're following 10 birds right now with remote transmitters. None of them are in the US yet, and they're all in South America. So I mentioned we are using GSM transmitters, which are, the data is collected by cell phone or cellular cell towers. And across the Amazon and the Andes, there is very little, if any, cell towers, which is a good thing. But so we are not getting data for those birds as they're doing this. So they are missing in action. However, once they get into cell service, they will start uploading that data, all that data that was taken up while they were traveling through these places. So we just have to be very, very patient and hope they make it back safely. They've got a big migration ahead. So yeah, it's always a tough time of year, and we can only hope that they're all making the travel just fine and finding those reserves they need to get through the tricky parts of high mountains and long water crossings. All right, let's move on to snail kites just a little bit here. A beautiful bird that is endangered, meaning it's federally endangered. It's got a specialized diet that only eats these apple snails. However, they will take turtles and crayfish, but really it's all about these snails, and they will eat the native snails. And you've probably seen these exotic giant apple snails, which they are able to crack open and eat as well. It takes them a little longer time, but it is a preferred food over. I mean, it's edible to them, so they're making do with it, and it's actually probably making them travel a little bit more to find new places that have these exotic snails. And I'll get into that. So these apple snails depend on water, water quality, water depths to reproduce. So if water levels are too high, the snails will be too deep. If the water levels are too low, the snails go underground for a little bit, and it's not suitable for the kites to feed there. So they're really kind of a Cinderella bird. They need real specific conditions to the water for their diet, and then appropriate nest substrate close by. I've cut off some of the area in South America where these birds are also occupying, but just wanted to really focus in on peninsular Florida here. The historic name of the snail kite is the Everglades kite, and that is true to form, as their stronghold was in the Everglades, but that has changed. They really are not nesting there, and there is not as many snails found in the Everglades anymore. So they're fanning out into other wetlands. We've done tracking studies with snail kites since 2007. We did a dual study looking at the use of VHF, that's the conventional telemetry, and compared it to satellite telemetry to see how effective these tracking methods were. And since then, we've been able to, the technology has come around that we can use GPS GSM transmitters like I've been showing you, which we get a lot of great remote data without even having to see the birds again. So we have, you've probably heard maybe that snail kites have now moved into the Paynes Prairie Preserve State Park here in Gainesville. We were able to tag 3 birds. You'll see 3 different colors, and these dots are the exact GPS locations of the birds that are foraging in the area. If you're familiar with Gainesville, this is the Sweetwater Wetlands Park, a very popular birding destination, and it is a functional wetland that is cleaning the water that's coming off of Gainesville, and then before it gets into Paynes Prairie State Park. And then this area is the Lachua Trail, where this blue bird, which is a male, spent a lot of its time. And then we had 2 females that we tagged off of 441 here. And they had a communal, whoops, let's go back. Communal roost here between I-75 and 441. A little worrisome because they're crossing a big road, a very busy road, and a lot of power lines. We have seen one casualty of a snail kite, just found a carcass on the road, not a banded bird, but so not sure how many birds may be affected by cars. But we are really excited to learn about this extension of nesting, the nesting population of snail kites. So the next known area south, or the farthest known area north in snail kite nesting, was Lake Tohopekliga, which is by Kissimmee, or just south of Orlando. And that had a big nesting group of snail kites for many years. And now they have done some prospecting. These kites fly and explore, and bit by bit, birds started to come north to Paynes Prairie. And this happened mostly right after Hurricane Irma, that kind of clogged up Paynes Prairie and made it much more of a wet prairie, and opened up a lot of area and covered it in water. And exotic snails were in the area, and the snail kites found it, and it became one of the most important nesting areas for snail kites in the last 2 years. So we went from zero nests ever to like 4 to 70 to 90 or something like that. So many birds nesting in Payne's Prairie. So we wanted to look at how the adult kites are doing in this situation. So where did they go now that they're at the northernmost extent of their range? And well, our birds, as you can see, from Payne's Prairie started making trips back south. So, you know, throughout their historic range here, just along to all the way down to Lake Okeechobee. But following along here, they went on the Kissimmee River. Here's the Lake Kissimmee, Lake Toho, and Lake Apopka. So they kind of crisscross through these areas of known snail kite locations. You know, it's like they knew exactly where these places were, probably because they've been there in the past. But now, as of today, we have one of our birds still in Payne's Prairie and another one in Highlands County on some private land. And then another, the male that we tagged, is on Lake Okeechobee. And there's a historic, there's a known nesting areas from the Kissimmee chain of lakes all the way through the Everglades that have been routinely surveyed year after year. And with our tracking data on over 40 birds, we find that a lot of the times our GPS locations of these 40 birds are not within these historical known nesting survey spots. So they're just finding these little canals and waterways and small wetlands where they're foraging for a while. Perhaps there's a few nesting spots here and there, but these areas are all very important to snail kites. It makes management quite difficult because they're crossing through and settling into these presumably or previously thought to be unsuitable places. So you can see a pile of snail shells where no doubt snail kites were sitting on these railings. It's right next to a canal and just popping through snail after snail after snail. So plenty of food for the snail kite. So kites we see are making these long distance movements. They're often very direct, but those movements that are new, especially for a young bird, you know, helps them find new wetlands. And then when the going gets tough, maybe the water level drops and the snails aren't as available, those kites make those moves to find new places to feed. They're very nomadic. They move to where the water and the food is making conditions perfect for them to forage and eat. They need networks of suitable wetlands to sustain their population. So they, some of these lakes, some water conservation areas that have had big nesting populations are suitable at one time or another. So sometimes they're nesting in on one lake, and then the next year the conditions are not suitable, so they move to another place. And we need enough of these wetlands to be active and ready to go, and with the proper hydrology to support their nests and their prey, so they can find places to propagate and make more little snail kites, which is just a huge management challenge because there's a lot of water going through the state and it's not predictable. And the good thing is these birds can fly. They'll look for these new places, but they may be ready to fly, keep flying north to find new places as these snails keep expanding, and maybe some more wetland areas will come online for them. So I just want to close up with a few things here. We have a website that is just got a makeover, and we're still working on getting some more pictures in there, but we would love for you to take a look. And we are tracking the swallowtail kites as they come north. And we have a blog on the website that we will have notices on our Facebook page when there's a new blog up. But come check our website out, and we have a sightings report tab under Get Involved. And we are also doing a nest monitoring program for swallowtail kites. So if you are interested, or if you have a nest location that you know of, we would very much like to know about those sightings. And you can find Eyes on Kites, or kite nesting portal, and you'll have a password activated. It's all free. It's just we have more information if you register and share your sightings with us. And with that, I'll close up, and thank you very much. It's been a lot of information, and I hope to see you all in the field soon. And please feel free to contact me at my email below here anytime. I'm happy to answer questions today or in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to open up our Q&A. If you have any questions for our speaker tonight or for our panelists, we're more than happy to answer those for you. Any curiosities or sightings? There was someone that said they saw one over the Philippi Park area, which is about 10 miles from where I am, at about 10:30 in the morning, and that was last week. So yeah, they are starting to trickle in.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the kites, they often will come into the state farther north. So maybe they'll cut across from the Yucatan all the way to the Panhandle, and then they'll start making their rounds back to their former nesting areas. Mm-hmm. So a lot of birds are like traveling through still to get to those places they want to be nesting.
Are you able to see the questions there, Gina, in the Q&A at the bottom of?
Yeah. Let's see. Yes, I think so. So, all right, Citrus County, yay, Swallowtail Kites. Attempts to stock areas with snails for snail kites. I don't know the Wellington, do I know that? Yeah, that's, I think that's by Boca or something like that. I do know of in the Miccosukee area of the Everglades, so that's off of the Tamiami Trail on Highway 40 that goes through. They are raising native apple snails in the hope to release snails, the native snails for snail kites, and just to repopulate the area there. And there's also a program in Palm Beach County. There's some people that are releasing native apple snails. let's see, when should I see apple snail eggs? Man, you know, we see them throughout the year.
Mhm.
They are most active in nesting from March to July. But you know, they'll, depending on weather and water height, they can be seen all throughout the year. Oh, yes, it's in Palm Beach. Yes, good, good. Okay, getting short-tailed hawk listed federally. I know it, the population does seem low enough to warrant um, federally listing the hawk. There does need to be more research on that. And if folks are interested in pursuing that, we are ready to learn more about it for sure, and try to get the information needed to warrant um, the listing process, but it takes quite a bit. So I think the thought is that it's just like a little blip of the population from South America. But again, it's here in Florida, and they don't, as far as we see and as far as we know, they don't migrate across the ocean. So I think there needs to be a genetic study of short tails to learn more about if they're even a separate population than their Central and South American counterparts. So again, happy to work with a student on something like that. It would be a really cool study, but we'd need to get samples, genetic samples from Central and South America as well. Real-time data so that we can find the birds. Some of that is sensitive information. So once they're back in the US, we don't want the nest locations visible, just because it could be, you know, we don't want people bothering the birds. But we try to keep up at least weekly with the migration of the birds as they come north. And for swallowtail kites, and then snail kites, because they are endangered, we do have to protect their data a little bit more. So you know, we share static maps of that. And as far as for us, we do get, with the GSM data, we get a data upload each day. But again, when the kites, or when any of these birds are far from cell towers, we don't get data if they haven't been able to upload it to a cell tower. So we just have to wait. The short-tail hawk is not a subspecies at this point for Florida, but again, a genetic study could be pretty awesome to find out that information. Okay, pair of kites and many limpkins in Marion County. Not seen snail eggs. You know, so even though you're not seeing snail eggs, you know, the adults are still under water. And especially okay, seeing small pair, and they're not there now. So I wonder if the level of water has changed and either become too deep or shallow, that the birds aren't able to access the snails as much. But they also, there is a like a kind of slow dormancy time for the snails, and if it's a small enough area, um, finding enough to keep them fed, um, they might be a little more picky about that and have to find new places. How do I trap the birds? Wow, each one has a different kind of trap mechanism. With the snail kites, since they eat snails, we have a specific trap that holds snails, and then we put it by a perch where they're feeding. And if they come down, they get their little feet caught, hopefully. And we're right there and we watch it happen. So we go get them right away. And with swallowtail kites and short-tail hawks, a couple different things. During the nesting season, if we know where an active nest is and the chicks are old enough, we have used a live great horned owl friend. So a trained owl that's perch trained. And those birds see the owl as a predator to their young. And we have a big mist net above the owl, and they come in and they dive at just like you see other birds kind of mobbing an owl if they're annoyed at it. Get away from my nest area, don't hurt my chicks. And they're always much higher than the owl. We put the net up very, very high, and they swoop in, and we're right there, and hopefully they get caught in the big net. And we work the birds up right there and are able to release them right on the spot. Okay, purple martins also migrate, and they do go to places similar to where the swallowtail kites do in South America. So they go to parts of Brazil too, and they are early migrants as well, but they come back even a little bit earlier than the swallowtail kites.
We have some great questions tonight.
I know. Okay, still wanting to trap and tag birds. You know, there's always things we can learn by trapping and tagging birds. And what's interesting to us is learning about birds in new places and priority areas. You know, we don't have any birds, swallowtail kites west of Pensacola. No, sorry, west of Tallahassee, St. Mark's area. We've tagged one bird there. So new areas are very interesting to us, and they're, you know, specific agencies and refuges and wildlife management areas may have their own questions about the specific swallowtail kites within their area. So we've been working group by group, trying to get some birds tagged and learn more about their use of these public lands. So we are still tagging birds. And with snail kites, there's all sorts of things to learn about where they are moving to these new wetlands and trying to get a signature of location data to figure out other nesting areas. And with swallowtails, of course, then we can find these communal roosts. That's golden. That's like wonderful to find where these birds are spending time and adding their numbers to our region or our national population monitoring scheme. Okay, how many apple snails does a snail kite eat in a day? Whew. I don't know that. So yeah, typically if they just gorge, they're pretty they eat a lot. I've seen in an hour, like, so, you know, when we're monitoring birds as we're trapping them and they're catching wild snails, you know, if it's a prolific area, they could get 4, 5, 6 an hour, and say they start at an hour after dawn and an hour and end an hour before sunset. It's a lot of snails with a little nap in between. So yeah, they're eating quite a bit. And then the apple snail eggs. So the native apple snails have eggs that are light pink, and they're beautiful little pearls, all stacked together, and not a ton of them. Like, you can actually count the individual eggs, but the exotic snails have dark fluorescent pink egg masses on the sides of like canal walls or the vegetation. And the eggs are so teeny and packed in there, you almost can't count the individual cluster, the individual eggs. So they are much more prolific than their native counterparts. Wow, good questions, everybody. Happy to continue any of these questions over email. One more. Snail kites need a perch. You know, snail kites will perch and feed like a kingfisher. Exactly. They'll just watch the surroundings, but they also do kind of a roving where they fly over the vegetation and search by air. Okay.
So I got one question.
Yeah.
How much are those GSM tags typically?
Yeah, so the GSM tags are like a third of what the satellite tags are. They don't last as long. The lifespan is an estimated 2 years, 2.5 years, and with the satellite transmitters, we were getting we had up to 7 years. But it's yeah, depending on what company and the extra add-ons, because you need basically a data plan to set up for per transmitter. So they're a couple $1,000 to $4,000 for all the data. Yeah.
How much are the
And,
satellite?
satellite is let's see, 4,500 plus $100 a month for the data. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. And that's, you know, the life of the transmitter. So if it lasts 7 years, that's
Okay, a lot of money.
gonna be more money. But yeah, so these transmitters have made it a little more accessible to afford more transmitters to kind of spread them out and get kind of that bite of data. But still, two years is you can learn a ton, and it's really neat. Mhm.
Thanks a lot. That's a great presentation.
Sure. Sorry, we talked a long time.
Perfect. If anyone knows someone who is interested or is interested in spotting and tracking these birds, send them the link that Gina had on the screen, and we'll have a recorded version of this webinar available on the Facebook page, because we were live on Facebook, and also on our YouTube channel. And you can find our social media links at the bottom of our webpage. And once again, I'd like to thank Gina Kent for her time tonight. I also want to thank each of you for your continued support of Clearwater Audubon. Make sure that you're getting our emails, the Wingbeat newsletter, and connecting with us on social media if that's your thing. We are seeking new committee and board members to join Clearwater Audubon. If you or someone you know is passionate about birding or conservation, please visit our website to learn more about these opportunities. Just click Our Board at the top of our webpage to view a list of available positions, and be sure to click the Field Trip tab for our latest spring field trips. We have quite a few of those, and at least one of those is a weekday field trip, which is something new we're trying. So 2 awesome 2 weekday field trips. So we're excited about that. We have to try everything this year and get everybody involved. So thank you again for joining us. I'm very excited about that. All right, everyone, have a good evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night,
everyone. Thank you.